I was ripped up by what happened in Newtown, as you can tell by the dozens of videos that I made about it. And every time I think about the video we showed you with the kids and the one in the baseball hat and the parent crying, talking about how his daughter lit up the room, I have a hard time keeping it together. But what's interesting is that when our drone strikes kill kids that are not American, it gets almost no coverage. And people are not broken up about it. And the president, who was teary-eyed about Newtown, which is exactly what he should have been, and we need to do gun control on that, is not teary-eyed about civilian casualties through our strikes. Now, the reason we have Al-Majala up there is because it's a town in southern Yemen, and we actually did Tomahawk missile strikes there, and there was also cluster bombs as well, and we killed 14 women and 21 children. 21 children. Now in Newtown, there was 20 kids killed, 28 overall. Now, of course, the U.S. says that's all incredibly different because we're trying to target militants. Did we target any militants in that strike? Well, it's unclear, but there was reporting by a Yemeni journalist that said, and that showed the bombs were from the U.S., and they showed the civilian deaths. So what happened to the journalist who showed the civilian deaths? He was put in prison by the government of Yemen. They were going to let him out a couple of years later. They were going to pardon him. Saleh, who's no longer the president of Yemen, was going to do it because he's a journalist, and it was obvious. And the people of Yemen were upset that he was put in jail for covering the civilian deaths. President Obama called and said, no, the U.S. government still calls that journalist a terrorist. Do not give him a pardon, put him back in jail. And they did. And he's still in jail today because President Obama made that call. Why? Because we don't want the world to see the kids that died because of our bombs. Now, I know a lot of people think they're justified in collateral damage, but at least see the kids first, as we did in the Newtown massacre, before you make that decision. Now, Brave New Foundation went and talk to people on the ground where these drone strikes happen. Now, a lot of these victims are from Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, etc. They're not all from Al-Majala. In fact, Al-Majala, as I told you, was a Tomahawk cruise missile strike. But look at the different drone strikes that have killed those kids throughout the world.
Mayazal Khan, 3 years old, South Waziristan, January 23, 2007.
Noor Said, 8 years old, South Waziristan, February 14,
This is one of the most precise weapons that we have in our arsenal.
Naeem Ullah, 10 years old, North Waziristan.
Our counterterrorism efforts have been exceptionally surgical and exceptionally targeted.
They have been very precise, precision strikes against Al-Qaeda.
Fatima Khan, North Waziristan.
U.S. officials say drones are highly accurate.
Zayed Wali Shah, 7 years old.
Drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties.
Aisha, 3 years old.
We are able to target with much more precision.
Nisar Khan.
All the actions that we take is totally consistent with international law.
Naeem Khan,
the past year,
North
there hasn't been a single collateral death.
Orphans of the
These are
Bismillah
easy
family.
decisions to make, but life isn't easy, war isn't easy.
We are very careful about avoiding civilian casualties.
So when we say that the kids were not killed and there was no civilian casualties, we are indisputably lying based on reporting, based on international groups that have gone on the ground and seen the dead kids that you just saw. And if that doesn't also cause you to think, hey, maybe we're doing something wrong there as well, you got to question yourself on that. Now, the other thing is, the people who've been doing this also have concerns because they've seen it. One particular guy is Brandon Bryant. He was a U.S. drone pilot. And he quit because he was racked with guilt over killing civilians. Now, the U.S. media, of course, has not covered that story almost at all. Der Spiegel in Germany did. They talked to him. And here's how he explains one particular instance. They say Bryant and his coworkers sat in front of 14 computer monitors and 4 keyboards. When Bryant pressed the button in New Mexico, someone died on the other side of the world. He remembers one incident very clearly when a Predator drone was circling in a figure-8 pattern in the sky above Afghanistan. Now, the article explains there was a countdown, and Bryant's job was to focus the laser on where the drone was going to go, and a guy sitting next to him pushes the button. But he can move the laser, and if he does, the bomb goes elsewhere. And there's a countdown happening, and he's seeing it go to 17 seconds, and then eventually, as you're about to see, 7 seconds. And he's thinking, God, I don't know who's in there. I hope they got the right information. And the Der Spiegel picks it up from there. With 7 seconds left to go, there was no one to be seen on the ground. Bryant could still have diverted the missile at that point. Then it was down to 3 seconds. Bryant felt as if he had to count each individual pixel on the monitor. Suddenly, a child walked around the corner, he says. The story then continues. Second 0 was the moment in which Bryant's digital world collided with the real one in a village between Baghlan and Mazar-e-Sharif. Bryant saw a flash on the screen, the explosion. Parts of the building collapsed. The child had disappeared. Bryant had a sick feeling in his stomach. Remember, this is one of our drone pilots. And he says, "Did we just kill a kid?" he asked the man sitting next to him. And the man who pushed the button says, "Yeah, I guess that was a kid," the pilot replied. So they asked, "Was that a kid?" They wrote in a chat window on the monitor. Der Spiegel continues. Then someone they didn't know answered. Someone sitting in a military command center somewhere in the world who had observed their attack. "No, that was a dog," the person wrote. They went back and they reviewed the scene on the video. They said, a dog on 2 legs? So when they tell you we don't kill civilians, and you know they're lying, because recently they reclassified every military-aged male, and by the way, they're now including children in that too. We did that story as well. As young as 8 years old, they're saying, by definition, they are now all considered militants. If we kill them, you have to prove that they were innocent. Otherwise, we assume they were militants. Now, if they did that to our kids, what would we think? Look at what happened in Newtown and how devastated we were. Now, how devastated do you think Pakistan is? How devastated do you think Yemen is? And all these places where we're doing drone strike after drone strike. And then, add insult to injury, we called our kids dogs because we couldn't possibly make a mistake. Glenn Greenwald made a good point about this. It is part of the dehumanizing of Muslims across the world. Because it's hard to kill kids. It's hard to live with that. As Bryant found out, he couldn't live with it. And so he moved on and he quit that job. So what do? No. They're not kids, they're militants. And if it looks on camera like they're a kid, we're going to call them a dog. If those kids don't also affect you, I think you got to question yourself, man. I'm ripped apart by what happened in Newtown. I'm also ripped apart by what happened in Al-Majala and so many different cities across Pakistan, Yemen, and other countries that we do drone strikes in.